Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I know we've got a few international people joining us. So welcome to the first madconNYC virtual panel discussion, Marketing During a Pandemic. My name is Carlos Rodriguez, the event director for madconNYC, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. But first, a few housekeeping notes. I want to let you know that we are recording today's webinar, and we will be sending it out after the conclusion of the webinar. If you're having any difficulty hearing us today and you're listening through your computer, please check and make sure your computer speaker volume is turned all the way up. If you're still having problems, can I suggest that you dial in through the conference line? That's what I'm doing. And the dial-in information was in the invitation you would have received. So feel free to ask questions throughout the webinar. If you see on the right-hand side, the control panel, there's a chat box within there. You can go ahead and just submit your questions as and when they come up, and we're going to have a Q&A at the end of the discussion. And now, for a shameless plug before we get started, so madconNYC, the event, as you know, will take place on December 1st and 2nd in Brooklyn. Listeners to this virtual panel today will get a 20% discount from now until April 30th on attendee tickets using the code webinar416, no spaces. With everything going on in the world, please be aware that should the event be postponed or canceled, you will have a choice to carry your ticket over to the 2021 edition or get a full refund, so no risk. And now, let's meet the starting three for today's game. So please meet, first of all, Janét Aizenstros. Janét is the chairwoman and CEO of Ahava Group Global, a women-led modern media parent company that includes Ahava Digital Group, a women-led digital consultancy. Among many notable achievements throughout her career, Janét has been recognized as one of the top conscious business leaders, a leader within Google's Women Tech Makers, and one of the top 10 inspiring women of Canada. Janét, if anyone is interested in connecting with you or learning more, how is the best way for them to reach you?
They can connect with me on social media, either Twitter or LinkedIn. Those are the best ways to get in contact with me.
Perfect. Thank you, Janét. Next up is Mike Grehan. Mike is the CMO and Managing Director at Acronym, a leading international agency recognized for search, social media, e-commerce, and technology. As well as being the former publisher of Search Engine Watch and ClickZ, he was also the chairman and 10-year board member of the Search Engine Marketing Professional Organization, the industry's largest global trade association. And in 1995, Mike formed the UK's first internet marketing consultancy. Mike, same with you. How can people best reach and connect with you?
I would say, given my background, just Google me. You'll find me. Don't worry.
I think you're right. All right, thanks, Mike. And rounding out our superstars panel is Gary Nix. Gary is an award-winning brand-forward strategist who earned his stripes as a disruptor, innovator, and predictor in the entertainment, magazine, and ad industries. Gary's known for merging kind of traditional marketing techniques with modern marketing techniques in order to create, build, and evolve compelling brands. Gary's a frequently sought after source in Adweek, The Drum, and Entrepreneur. You might have heard some of those. And an adjunct professor and guest lecturer, as well as a subject matter expert on ethics, culture, and community as a business necessity. Gary, what is the best way people can get in contact with you?
The two best ways are either to go to my website, which is BRANDarchist.com, or you can find me on social media, either at LinkedIn, Gary J. Nix, or on Twitter at Mr. McFly, that's MR_McFly.
Perfect. Thank you, Gary. All right. So with that, let's get to the first question for this panel. Panel members, as brands and companies focus on taking care of their people and their communities and keeping the lights on, as it were, it seems that sales right now is not always the highest priority. My own company is also using this time to get our internal processes refined and enrich our customer data. What advice would you give to companies' brands regarding preparatory tasks to perform while the sell approach is on hold? And if I can start with Janét on that one.
Want to start with me? Well, I actually think the real question is not to stop selling or not putting the sell on hold, but really asking what services within your organization can be brought to the forefront during this unique time of seclusion. So, for example, we've always provided growth and scale plans to corps, right? So when the seclusion started taking place, we pivoted immediately once we knew that this was going to be enforced, and we began focusing solely on technology and targeted consumer data for our growth and scale, and then blending that and really putting at the forefront our e-com platforms as our primary focus. Just because certain sectors right now, especially like retails, have skyrocketed, or e-com has skyrocketed during this time. And even some online retailers have seen sales that in certain industries of as high as 136% increase, right? I think a few weeks ago, Amazon came out and publicly shared that they were hiring over 100,000 people to keep up with the COVID demand. So I think it's just, and even we've seen like in my org that it's just we're overtaken by people seeking out our verified data. So some companies may have retracted or diminished their ad spend, but we've also seen that in one capacity, but there's other companies that are willing to take advantage right now of verified data. And so that's kept many of our clients happy, and new clients coming on just to ensure like churn and burn rate for their ad spends are completely maximized, right? So I think that, like, Merit, to your point too, when you were talking about like reevaluating internal and external processes, you did talk about, like, I think right now, kind of just transitioning in this time, that companies really need to evaluate and start establishing any processes at this time. Just looking at what is that, I think the one part in this period that I've been the most astounded by is how companies just haven't been agile enough to adapt to remote working. And I definitely understand that certain sectors can't adapt, but I think that there's been enough proven research that have substantiated that remote working definitely has an increase in productivity. And so I think that people need to, it's just really eye-opening that just kind of watching this period of time. And I have a plethora of things I can say on that topic, but I just think that just brands overall are definitely in a place of where they just have to look at everything and not don't stop, just learn to pivot.
Got it. Mike, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting because during this kind of period, some brands, some companies will benefit greatly. Some are going to suffer and have to think about how they'll pivot and do something else. You know, I was looking at some data, just given that Janét mentioned Amazon. Back in 2009, when we had the Great Recession, financial collapse going on then, that was a great period for Amazon because their top-selling item was the Kindle. And actually on Christmas Day of 2009, they had a record of their own. They actually sold more ebooks during that period than printed books. So for some companies, you know, it's kind of a boom time. In our own clients, you can see both ends of the scale. One of our top clients is Four Seasons Hotels. This is a really difficult time for them. On the other hand, we work with Scott's Miracle-Gro, and not that they would take advantage of a pandemic, but this is boom time because everybody's at home. You know, and you might say that some people don't know what to do when they're working from home, but they all know how to do gardening, believe me. So a lot of people are spending time there. But I think that, you know, when you opened up, Carlos, you were saying that, you know, your company is looking at internal things and that kind of stuff that you can do. Yeah, I mean, I guess you could do a lot of that, but I would say that for many brands, now is a good time to start and think about what if your business was seasonal, and look at some of the major brands that do work over seasonal periods. You know, I mean, if you were the US's #1 distributor of Christmas trees, how many times a year do you get to do that? You know, so there's got to be something else. So looking at how your business can tool up and do something else. I'm not saying you have to start making respirators in your back room. So I think that's one of the things to do, to look at other areas of the market. Look at, everybody has this cash cow where most of the money is, but how can you adapt and certainly begin to look to move into other areas that could be, within different categories, could even be within a geographical region, those kind of things. And I think one extremely important thing to do is that, again, particularly when you're online, and we'll come back to that again a little bit later on. But everybody seems to think when you're online that you have to get on and do your own business in isolation. And yet it's just like being offline. If you think of all of the opportunities that you have to work in conjunction with other partners, where you can do everything, co-promotions, sponsorships, even charity, those kind of things, but looking for partners to work with. So I think now is an ideal time to look around you within the kind of community, the business community that you're in, and look at where you can help other businesses and they can help you. And again, as we begin to get around to this recovery period, you'll probably find that the extra work that you've put in there, that you can look at new products, processes, development that you've had in other areas that you will reap a benefit from,
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. No, interesting. Very interesting. Gary, your thoughts on this?
Sure. I think Janét and Mike made very good points. You have the businesses that are actually going to fit very well in this time because we're still going to need certain things from certain businesses, right? So if we're going to talk about all the essential businesses that are still operating at higher volume, but structurally as is, those kind of businesses are going to be helpful. But that also points to what's helpful about their brand, right? So if your brand is not necessarily helpful in this kind of time directly with your business, how do you figure out how to make it more helpful? Do you go back in and look at new systems and new structures as how you can become better? Are there ways that you can partner with other people to actually help your consumers? It's the thinking about the sell part. We all know in business you have to sell, okay? The lifeblood of your business is the revenue that you bring in. But you also have to understand from a brand standpoint that the things that you actually believe in, the ways that you connect with your consumers are just as important. And right now, if you can't sell, or if selling is going to be a detriment to your business in the long run, you have to look closer towards the connections. How can you make the connections better? What can you do to actually help the people? Because you still want to be able to be in a position of being either top of mind or in better sentiment, or still connected with these people when this pandemic slows down, when we're past it and everything, right? Selling is necessary, but the sell only paradigm is one that we're realizing more now doesn't work for everyone, if anyone.
No, that's actually interesting, and actually that very thing that you're just talking about brings me to my next question. And actually, let's stay with you, Gary, for a second. So the next question is, and you kind of touched upon this already, is can you give your overview on the top, let's say, 3 things that brands need to do right now to as Janét said, pivot to the new reality we're living in? And as a quick follow-up to that, which brands do you think are doing this well right now? And if it's not too controversial, which brands do you think are not particularly doing this well? I give you the hard one.
Sure. So the first thing is you have to understand where your brand fits within your community of consumers, right? What is it that they are there for? Because in my belief, they're not only there for your product or service. Okay, because you have so much competition. What is it that's actually making them choose you over your competitors, right? So you have to come to a better understanding of what that connected piece is, where you fit, right? That's going to also help you understand how to connect better, how to sell better, ultimately. The second tip is to understand that as a business, you are in some form of service. If you have a product, that product is in service to your consumer. If you have a service, that's pretty automatic, right? Understanding that that's part of what you do. So as long as you're able to serve, or the better you're able to serve your consumer, whether it's directly or indirectly, the better your connection will be. The third part is understanding that all of these things that we're talking about now under the guise of a pandemic are things you should have been doing in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. From a brand standpoint, especially from the perspective of people not buying product or services, they actually buy brands. You should be doing these things. These are the things that get people to connect with you. These are the things that get people to stay with you and not go on to your competitors. Yes, your product or service has to have a certain amount of quality. Yes, it has to serve its purpose, absolutely. But the thing that's going to connect is usually more emotional than anything. So you have to understand where those connected pieces are. And it's not just because of a pandemic. It's because of that's something that you need to do because you're dealing with human beings, right? Now, in terms of who's doing it well, I think that the real answer to that is going to happen over time, because you have these companies that are doing things in this moment that can be good. You have some car companies who are doing more like deferred payments or longer financing or things of that nature, which is something that's helpful. But how helpful is that? That still remains to be seen. You have companies that have kind of not done any good before that are trying to do good now. So there's a certain amount of skepticism around, okay, are you just doing this now for this, or are you going to do this continually? Only time can tell on that. The brands who are more successful in this, and I mean, the brands that not necessarily are like, say, the Amazons, because, okay, this is, you need to get stuff you're already ordering, you're doing it more now, fine. But when you have companies like, say, a Nike who already have that great relationship with their consumers, and they're like, okay, here are the things we're doing. We're actually going to help people who need more help. We're not going to focus on selling right now, because they don't even have to focus on selling. People are going to buy from them regardless.
Yeah.
And the more things that they do that when it looks like they're doing something really good for their community is only going to make people buy from them even more. Right? Now, in terms of the ones who are not doing it well, and I don't want to necessarily get on them too hard, but I think it goes more to the point of they don't see the connectivity. The ones who are saying, oh, we're doing this, all the emails that we got, the 27,345 emails a day that we got saying that here are the things that we're doing to make sure that our stores are clean or whatever. And you're kind of like, okay, so? Or the emails you get from people that you have not been in contact with. You know, you signed up for an email list 3 years ago. You haven't heard from them until now. It's not the worst thing, but it's also far from the best thing, right? Because you don't have that relationship. So instead of like kind of naming brands, I'm going to kind of talk about things that are hits and misses.
Yeah, sorry for interrupting there, Gary, but it was interesting because I was just talking to somebody today about there are some people, you know, messaging is just right and the creativity is good. I think Facebook has done a pretty good job given the reliance that people have on them. But I don't know whether you've seen the Uber ad that's been running. And it's just such a beautiful ad. The creative is beautiful, but the message at the end just says, thank you for not riding Uber. You know? And I get it. On the one hand, that's a great message to stay at home. But like if I was an Uber driver, right, I would just drive to the nearest bridge and jump off, you know, I'd be like, thanks, guys.
No, interesting. Janét, over to you on that one as well.
Well, I think it's something both Mike and Gary touched upon. And just to kind of circle back to something that Gary mentioned, the companies that are going to weather during this time, it's not just, I think it comes back to something that I kind of touched upon. It's looking at some of your efficiencies that are taking place in your organization, right? You know, I've definitely spoken to many of our clients, and it seems to be like this scramble that's taking place like behind the scenes. So meanwhile, they touched upon some of the consumer parts, but you don't want the internal part of even of your organization to fall apart either, because of the lack of agility in adapting to this the remote working dynamics. And if I was companies right now, just in order to ensure, yes, definitely take care of your branding, ensuring that you're connecting with your consumers are really important. Those are necessary in this time of selling, but it's also looking at some of the internal processes and reevaluating that, like coming up with like a contingency plan, right? There are some, like Mike alluded to before, there are some companies that may not make it out of this season well at all, and they may not even be here. And it's just kind of like looking at coming out with contingency plans. That means dealing with accounting, finance, different levels of management to really start looking in at how can we streamline costs and weather this storm, and then find ways to repurpose your employees during this time. I think the other part is why I mentioned finance too, is just some of the things that have come up, particularly around Fortune Corps. I will share this, that banks are there as a last resort. Credit is accessible for leverage, not sustainability. And I think that governments are last resort options. So it's kind of like looking at some of the corporate practices as well to see how not just large, but from small, medium, and large size businesses weathered the storm as we go through this transition. So financial contingency is also important as part of your internal processes, because you unsure, like from the consumer standpoint, is that consumers, there's a lot of really amazing products that are coming out, but consumers become attached to something and then all of a sudden it disappears. And what if you're the only person that actually makes that particular product really great, and then you're gone? And you're gone not because of your product, but because your internal processes were ineffective for your organization. So it's also looking at that as well, right? And many organizations right now, IT departments are overwhelmed because of basic things that advisors had stated years ago. Why is there not a VPN? Remote working has been around now. We've been talking about this for 15 years. There's no reason why. And certain industries, like we've definitely seen certain brands, like hospitality is an industry that is going to struggle right now. Totally understand that. And I think all of us can agree on that. But when you're looking at certain admin-based organizations, like even myself or some of the people on this panel can share that you should, like for Mike and Gary, I'm pretty sure that you can work from home and still connect with your clients, and there should not be any discourse that's taking place there.
I can't connect with mine without gardening.
Yeah, I mean, not to go too much of a tangent here.
You're just too funny.
But it's so weird to me that we're still having this conversation about remote work and the values of it, when
right.
and it drives me even crazier when it's coming from industries that depend on like webinars for learning.
Right.
It's just like, okay, so instead of these people coming into your office to have this meeting, you're willing to sit there and learn from them via some form of technology, and you can't think of how to do the same thing in your business during any time, much less a time like this. Right. It's just like you have to let go of so many of these old ideas that we have, that you have to be in the place to make sure someone's working and all this other stuff. But I don't want to go too much on that tangent right now.
I think this situation has, let's say, forced the hand somewhat of some employers who may not have who may have had an issue with trust.
Absolutely agree.
Who was the person that said that it froze for some reason?
Sorry, that was me. Yeah, my computer went crazy there just for a second.
Yeah, I think that there's processes, just when you were talking about employers with trust, there are processes that can be set up, especially with a VPN, seeing log on and all of those types of things. So I don't think it's an issue of trust. It's just they don't want to invest in that. Like risk management is usually something that companies hear about, and then they may put a teeny tiny bit of money towards it. But then when they put in like the basic processes, then it kind of gets swept under the rug. In the era of technology and in the era that we're in, it is vital, right? Cybersecurity is a vital component, especially like Mike can definitely talk about this probably as well, especially for advertising and marketing agencies. If you're dealing on proprietary projects, like I'm pretty sure Mike does, I do as well, we cannot risk having someone all of a sudden whether we get hacked or something taking place that could infringe on our clients. So these processes are vital. They're vital. I think we may have lost Carlos.
Yeah, it's funny because we were talking about virtual backgrounds before, and then he turned into one.
Can you still hear me?
We can hear you.
We can still hear you, Carlos. Yeah.
All right, good. Well, you know what? If you can't see the video, you're not missing much.
I wouldn't mind going back.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Mike, please.
I was going to say, just going back to brands, a couple of things that Gary said. I mean, obviously that's an area that you specialize in a lot, Gary. But I do think now it's an opportunity for brands to think about how they can change their message, even if they can't sell stuff right now. You know, I mean, a brand means so much to people beyond just please sell me your stuff. You know, it becomes part of my lifestyle, and trying to change the message, but to be really authentic about it, to be sincere about it, you know, because like you say, there are people who take advantage of this, people dropping into your inbox that you're seeing around that you didn't see before. Why? Because they sell masks, you know, that they're making out of underpants or whatever. I have no idea, you know, all of a sudden these people just arrive. But I think if you think about the communications model itself, one of the problems, I think what makes a good brand and what separates them from the pack is understanding how communication works fully. And I'm talking about even scientifically, like the Shannon Weaver model that I talk about a lot, that you have a transmitter and a receiver. And in between, although it's a very scientific thing, there's all of this noise that's going on. But the more you understand what the receiver likes to receive, the easier it is for you to transmit. So instead of just thinking, what shall I say, or would it be nice to say this, try and understand a lot more. I think one of the things that, you know, as everybody is just trying to look at the history and figure out, because looking at the history is the best way to figure out what's going to happen in the future and how we're going to get through this. You know, the last pandemic was in 1918, and there's not much information around, but I was doing some searching around. But from an economic point of view, there's not a lot, but what I did see, there was actually a newspaper article from a newspaper in Arkansas, of all places, and they were giving some stats there about what had happened economically in their city. There wasn't a great, you know, in the state generally, there wasn't a lot that was different to now. The one thing that I could connect with, though, was the fact that they said it will be short term. I thought, well, that's probably a good sign. But the one thing that stood out more than anything else is that the author was writing about the longer lasting effects of this will be that people will change. It is about the people. It's not about the economic, you know, you can think about all of those kind of things. So now is the time to be more authentic, because the people who are living through this, it's not going to go away. It's going to be here, you know. So, you know, without getting too deep into the psychology of the way that you can work as a brand, I think the more authentic that you can be, the more that you can think of. And then this is purely tactical, and again, from an emotional support, don't stop advertising. Don't pause it just because that's, you know, the guy in the CFO said we can save more money if you stop advertising. At this time, you still need to be there to prove to the loyal customers that you have that you are there to support them during this time. From a practical point of view, you don't want to lose your position in the market. Somebody else will come in and take that, you know. Again, just going back to history lessons, back in 28, I think, the big breakfast cereal at the time that was called Post, I think, and they stopped advertising because, you know, this is like not a good time, and this is the best way to save some money. And Kellogg's came up with something called Rice Krispies, and they've now been the best-selling cereal since then, bar none, you know. So maybe now is the time to actually take some of the opportunities to start preparing for when the recovery comes around, you know.
Yeah.
And looking at advertising as a form of communication to stay in touch, you know, stay in touch with people, to have them understand where you fit, right? So the more authentic brands are already going to be able to do that, because even if they have to do some sort of pivot temporarily, or even add this pivot to what they are going to offer in the long run, it still makes sense because there's actual purpose behind the communication and their action, right? So advertising it from that standpoint. But I think because of so much bad advertising that takes place, when people think advertising, they're thinking ad, sell, 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 sell. You know, so it's like that semantic thing that we often deal with.
It's that like, you know, however long this lasts, when you stop the advertising, and then we get over this and we start to come into the recovery, and you start advertising again, and you as a customer look and go, oh, now you want my money. Where were you the last 3 months? You know?
Yeah.
Janét, what were you going to say on that one?
Well, I was just going to share, it's something that Mike also touched upon too, creating more of that emotional connection. And there's different ways to create emotional connection. You know, sometimes it's definitely not to stop spending money on advertising. This is actually the time to actually, in my opinion, to start increasing in certain ways, and creating more of that emotional anchor. So that way, when as the market transitions, and I hope people know that this is going to be a process back to where we once were. And so it's just keeping consistent in this time, because you're gonna, it's just, this is just how the market is. It's been like this. And going back to even what Mike said about the history, it's great. It's important that, especially for millennials, that we actually have faced something that has impacted us and left an imprint on us. Because in our generation, we really haven't seen war in the way that, like, when my parents, my mother was born in 45, when the year that World War II ended, right? We haven't really seen some of these things that have really left an imprint on us. So we're almost emotionally disassociated. But now that something has actually shaken the entire globe, I think that this will leave an imprint. And going back to whichever Gary or Mike said it, it will leave us changed, right? It'll definitely leave us changed in a way that we become more intentional in how we move forward.
Got it. No, agreed. All right. So, wow, I can't believe it's 2:32 already. I've got a couple of last questions for you. Mike, I'm going to start with you on this one. So, you know, we've been talking a little bit over the past half an hour about selling in particular. You know, how much, when do I start selling? Some brands need to sell, some brands don't need to sell. How do you think that reduced commercial transactions, and that could be consumer or enterprise, but an increase in internet usage from everyone being quarantined and stuck in their house, how do you think that's going to affect companies in place SEO strategies? And then as a quick follow-up to that, and then how do you see such heavy reliance on the internet now affecting digital marketing and advertising overall when this is kind of like all over?
Wow, I've got 7.5 minutes to do this.
That was a mouthful, Carlos. I don't know.
That wasn't a question. That was a small chapter in a book, but let's go for it. I think the first thing is, let's just tackle the online thing. Yes, I mean, of course, anybody who's online been doing business online, you're in a good place. If you're selling digital products, yes, that's a great thing. Like I said about Amazon before, selling, you know, ebooks at this point in time. For many other people, it's just like any other retail operation. You sell it online, but somebody has to distribute it offline as well. So you have to look at that supply chain and, you know, work around that. You know, going to the SEO, obviously I have a lot of people coming to me because of my background in SEO talking about, it's now a good time to do SEO. I'm like, you should have been doing this forever. And you can't just say, you know, with paid search and other forms of digital advertising, I think that costs money, but SEO is free. No, it is not free. And now is not the time to start. 6 months ago, a year ago, you should be doing this all of the time. You have to tie this to the customer journey and understand. And it kind of goes back to what I was saying about brands before. I think what people forget about Google is people think that if I'm kind of online e-commerce business, I'll advertise on Google and people will only come to Google because they wake up in the morning and go, I have a credit card, I'm going to buy something. You know, that customer journey starts a lot earlier than just at the checkout, you know, just when it gets to the transactional. So I think everybody needs to think about this cognitive process that we go through. This is a proven process, it's scientific, that we start with informational, we go navigational, and then transactional. And I've always been a firm believer, understanding and studying consumer behavior the way that I have, and thinking from a brand point of view, that the earlier on the journey that I can connect with a potential customer, the earlier that brand affinity begins. And that's why early stage content, which is what SEO is all about, those informational queries, when people start the journey, if you could meet them a little bit earlier. So starting to work on content that solves problems. Google's mission is to satisfy the human need for information, not to sell stuff. That's a byproduct. So when people wake up in the morning, they have a problem that they want to solve. Maybe there is a brand that can solve that problem. But going back to that communications model that I was talking about, about transmitter and receiver, if I understand this person has a problem and I'm there to start the hand holding, help them solve that problem a bit earlier on, then there's much less checkout friction by the time we get to the checkout, because the brand affinity has already begun. So yeah, I think, those people that have got SEO strategies in place, they don't have to think, what do I do now? That's great. It's in place. You're doing it. Make the most of it,
Got it. No, interesting. Yeah, and I couldn't agree more about the time to start was not right now, but maybe a lot earlier. Gary, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Mike said it very well, because all the idea around sell is based off of the assumption that people just go, hey, I want to buy something, which has never been the case, right? Yeah, sometimes it makes it hard for us to explain what it is that we're doing, but we're actually trying to help our clients or those that we work with understand the consumer journey, that you have to hit them at other places in order for them to for them to, first of all, have enough affinity to be even interested to actually buy, right? And then you start getting towards trust and the loyalty, the things that we want to get, But I mean, we all know that the best form of marketing, or the most effective form of marketing, is word of mouth, right? And you can't do word of mouth without the information, right?
Yeah.
It's that
Exactly.
combination of information and trust that helps. So sorry to those who are only starting their SEO journeys, because they should have done it before. But also, if you haven't done it before, you need to do it now instead of waiting. Like, oh, now I waited too long. No, just get on top of it. Just start now if you haven't started already. Because
There is
you
this
shouldn't wait
kind of
anymore.
really interesting period that we're in right now, and without going too deep into it, it's kind of part of something that I'm writing about. When media was scarce, and what I mean by that is there was a time before we were online where you had press, radio, and TV, and you somehow had to insert yourself in there and make a noise. Yeah, that was a long time ago. Media is in abundance now. So that linear customer journey that people used to talk about, this funnel thing, that doesn't exist anymore. It's completely fragmented, and media is in abundance. Even my terrible Twitter account is a media account. What we're doing now is a media thing, So if you want to try and find and connect with your next potential customer, then you do actually have to be part of that journey and part of the conversation. So you can meet them when they start the informational query at Google, how do I fix my lawnmower or whatever it is, and sell them the way to do that later on. But you better be there to meet them at Facebook, Instagram, and everywhere else on that particular journey,
Yeah, agreed. Janét, any thoughts on that one?
I think everyone summed that up eloquently. It's just start. It's just the SEO journey. You have to just start it. I know, just even in looking at data, I know that people have been much more intentional in like even shifting their data sets right now to really hone in, because there's just an abundance. There's a lot more noise. There's just a lot more noise that's happening online, and in order to even be heard means that you have to really siphon through and find those people. So people are becoming much more intentional when looking at their keywords, their data sets, for targeting.
Yeah,
understanding.
Agreed.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'll tell you what. I've got one more question for you, and then we've got a couple of questions that our audience has sent in. So my final question, if you can all take 30 seconds to a minute to answer this one. I know that's easier said than done, but we've already spoken a lot about this during the discussion today. But what changes, if any, do you see overall in the marketing and advertising industry once we've recovered from this pandemic? What will be the new normal, and what is your kind of alongside with that? If you could give everyone here, and it could even be SEO, but if you could give everyone here one takeaway in terms of helping them navigate that new normal, what would it be? And that's open to whoever wants to start.
I can start with these words: pace, not race. And I think there are people who are sitting waiting, thinking that this is going to be like a light switch thing, that people do believe that, the president is going to open up the country and everybody's going to start turning up in restaurants, and boom, we'll press the button for that campaign. Now is the time, as I said, looking at SEO, looking at those earlier stages, connecting with people where they're trying to solve different problems now, and then pace the way that your media comes back into light. I mean, you shouldn't drop out completely anyway, but pace it accordingly and be aware of, where the parts of the economy are growing, and try not just to race towards the checkout again. As for a new normal, I'll just leave it at this. As I said before, what came out of the last pandemic, what comes out of a recession, is people don't forget, and they are emotionally changed because the world has changed around them. Be prepared to change with them,
Very wise words, Janét?
Oh, I think, Gary, you've been on my website with Pace Not Race. I was going to share, I think he summed it up accurately. People are, in fact, changed. And I think that in this time, it's repurposing. I would probably say I would tap into that narrative. It's just about repurposing how you're going to move forward, looking long and far, and just understanding that this is the time to do a lot of research, to become more aware of how the market is shifting. And I think we're just inundated with a lot of like polarizing media. One person is saying this, another person is saying that. It's kind of siphoning through the noise, as I shared before. And how we move forward. And I think and coming back to being authentic and being intentional, right? You're definitely going to have people that are changed, and it's just kind of anticipating what that change looks like. But I think things are so up in the air right now, none of us can really answer what that normal is going to look like. Right?
Yeah.
I don't even think it's a great question. It's just not something I think any of us can answer, or anyone in the market can truly answer, because this pandemic has left many of us kind of like, oh wow, the whole world has come to a halting stop, right? And so don't know what that normal is going to look like.
Well, that in itself is an answer. Is it too early to start saying, all right, here is my strategy now for the new normal, and I'm going to announce it now, without actually seeing kind of what's going to be happening over the next weeks and months?
Well, exactly. And the strategy that you develop now can also change as we get closer to the summer, closer to the fall, and going into Q1 of 2021, right? So we're just going to have to kind of take it, as Mike was sharing, the pace, not race. It's just going to have to be one day at a time, as we're kind of trying to predict. Our typical forecasting just doesn't, it looks entirely different now in this spectrum. There's definitely been a disruption in the industry, but on a positive note, that disruption can also be a great catalyst for many new startups, new types of products. So companies now kind of back to internal processes and getting the wheels churning. You're right, just looking at different ways and how you can kind of come out of this in a new way. And I've definitely seen that with some of the things that I've seen in the private sector as well as in the commercial sector.
I have to say, Janét, by the way, I was on your website the other day, so if I did steal pace not race from your website, I'll expect a letter from your lawyer very soon.
Gary, if I can end with you, your one takeaway for the audience in navigating this new normal.
Sure. So my one takeaway, and it all fits into the new norm that I've kind of been talking about with a lot of colleagues: value your people, man. I mean, look, if there's one thing that we learned about this, is like who's important, what we're understanding more about the value of people and what they can potentially have to go through. And this is absolutely not to diminish any of the essential workers. I mean, we as a society should have had a much better understanding of how important the people who are actually still out in the world working today. Some people are learning that now. You need to know that, but you can still take that same perspective and think about how the people who work within your companies, what their values are, what they're bringing to the table. Because the people who are working at these companies, they are brand ambassadors, whether de facto or not. These are the people who make up the embodiment of your brands and businesses. These people are important, right? The people who are doing the hard work are important. That's one of the biggest lessons we need to take out of this, because it extends to everything else that we do, because we're always dealing with people. So that's the one that's going to help create a better norm. That's the lesson that we should learn, that I hope we learn, but that, only time will tell.
Yeah, and I was just going to add to that, Gary. I think that's what I was alluding to before as well. That's why there needs to be more corporate governance. And I would even say, even from a legislative standpoint, there has to be better governance on how organizations really put it together, financial contingencies. We cannot marginalize our people during this time. Like, as I shared at the beginning, my organization's fine, but we were remote and then acquired space, right? So it was a very different structure. So for us transitioning, it's easy. We're fine for this year, so we're not even tapping into funding or anything like that. But I think when I look at some companies, it's like they were more concerned about their stakeholders and then willing to repurpose or marginalize their people because they're more about pleasing their stakeholders. You can't do that. There has to be the government. You can't rely on the government. The government is a last resort. And so especially when you're looking at quarterly profits or these quarterly revenues that are billions of dollars in certain sectors, but then all of a sudden you have organizations that are having to lay off the majority of their staff. And there's definitely sectors that are going to be impacted. There's nothing that they could do. There's not even a question about that. There are, like I shared, certain sectors that it's like, this is a no-brainer, guys. You definitely should have had contingencies in place. It's our people matter and the people are important. That's actually true leadership, and leadership in this era is about the people. It's relationship first, transaction secondary.
Mm-hmm. Good relationships will lead to the transactions.
Exactly.
Ultimately. All right, so I think we've got time for one question. Again, if you've submitted a question, we don't get to yours, we will answer these after the webinar. But one question I wanted to throw out there to everyone came in from one of our listeners to say, in large, complex marketing organizations, how do you recommend all of the functions align? The quick-to-respond solutions have everyone stepping on other departments' toes, and each leader is out to prove their own results, etc. So what are your advice on those organizations with those different departments in terms of aligning during this time?
Well, I think you can start with immediately. Why did you wait till now to start aligning? I mean, I say that tongue in cheek with large, complex marketing departments, and we have to deal with them all the time. We deal with global organizations. It is very difficult internally to get them all aligned. So, we tend to find, particularly in the areas of business that we specialize in, with most of the organizations that we work with, there is an evangelist for that particular area, And I think if you do have evangelists, so if you have one for search, if you have one for social media, if you have one for display, if those kind of things, having these kind of evangelists, and then try and spread this message. This is we have to work together on this because it's an integrated approach, and you can't have that integrated approach if you don't know what the other guy is doing. There isn't a short answer to that one, believe me. But whoever sent that question, I would love to sit down for the rest of the day, open a bottle of Sauvignon Blanc, and let's get to the bottom of this thing.
So you know what? Whoever sent that in, you know what? You got the invitation there. Let's do that.
Yeah, but I think actually the short answer is what you like. I mean, it's literally you have to go ahead and get it done. One of the projects that I worked on a while ago was, we were working with a client, and they wanted to kind of transform the way that they did their communication on digital channels. I was like, okay, cool. But the first thing we need to do is actually make sure everyone's on the same page. So part of my task was to help them rewrite their global guidance and governance, because you're not able to do the things that you want to do without making sure everyone's on the same page. So the short answer is to make sure everyone's on the same page first. Now the answer is not necessarily easy, or it takes a while to accomplish it, but the answer to the question is actually really easy. You have to make sure that everyone's on the same page.
Janét, any thoughts?
Yeah, and it's why I started with the internal and external processes, because if the internal, it starts from the top. If leadership is off, then it trickles down. And usually when one department, they usually allow something to lapse in one department and then thinking it's not going to affect, but that cancer spreads, right? And then guess who is affected by that? The consumer. Your consumer will eventually, if it's not remedied from inception, they will eventually feel that. Now, everybody in organizations, whether in small, medium, large size, knows that no process is perfect, right? You're constantly going to be assessing, tweaking, looking at how you can be better. But I think it comes back to take this time. This is the time to be looking at all internal processes operationally. What works? What doesn't work? How can we create a greater form of communication internally, as well as what is our communication going to be externally as well? These are the time to start really, and you have an opportunity here to play, because the market, like as we talked about, like this pace of having to go day to day, you have the opportunity now to look at how to kind of tweak this voice, and you actually get permission to fail in this time, right? Because there is, and like when Mike talked about Uber, Uber may not be the best strategy, but it's really a time to play. You get the opportunity to fail, where before, when there's a beacon of light spotlighting on you. Right now, people are kind of lackadaisical. Sometimes people are in the office, but they're not really there. I'm more concerned with playing with my kids. That's people's attitude right now, because they're in this place of seclusion. So this is now the opportunity to see what works, what doesn't work, what needs to be fixed, what is working great, and how can you expand upon that.
Fantastic advice. Fantastic. All right. So listen, I want to wrap this up. We have some more questions, which again, we will provide the answers to all the questions that have been submitted to after the presentation today. But that's really, we're already over time. So I just want to say thank you to our unbelievably amazing panelists, Janét, Gary, and Mike. All three of them who you will say, second shameless plug coming up here, you will see at madconNYC on December 1st and 2nd. Again, remember, no risk, 20% off, webinar 416 is the code. But thank you for everyone who listened in, who registered, and who attended. Hopefully you found this Marketing During a Pandemic virtual panel useful, and you got some great tips. I know I absolutely sure did. Just as a reminder, we will be sending the recording of the virtual panel later on. And thanks again, everyone. And please follow these speakers and madconNYC on social media, and you'll hear more about our other upcoming virtual events. So Janét, Gary, Mike, thank you again so much.
Thank you. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Let's do it all again soon.
Yep. Bye now.
Thanks, everyone.